Hey, how's it going guys? Jack and Matt here with the Toasty Bros, and today we're here to give you all some edumacation. We got a gaming PC, a home theater PC, and a workstation PC.
Each PC has its own specific use case, and we're gonna be testing each one against each other's use case. So gaming PC, mini PC, home theater PC, and workstation PC, can each one do each other's tasks? Is one better than the other? Well, we're about to talk about that. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by VIPGVGMall.com, an online marketplace to get access to some really awesome discounted game keys, Microsoft Office keys, and more specifically, Windows 10 licenses.
So it is super easy to get something like Windows 10. All you have to do is put it in your cart, check out, use code TB20 to get 20% off, our special code, and then you just take that key, put it into the Windows activation, and boom, you have an activated Windows.
We have been using GVG Mall for years now. We highly recommend it to activate those new gaming PCs, or if you're just rocking an old gaming PC that still hasn't been activated, check the link in the description down below. And special thanks again to VIP GVG Mall for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's get into the video, shall we?
So obviously this test is not apples to apples. Each one of these PCs is slightly different in some way, but I try to keep the price points within $100 of each one. So we spent around $550 to $700 on each of these systems.
So what we're gonna do is talk about each of these builds, what their use case is, and then we're gonna be testing them in 3 different ways: a gaming test, a home theater test, and a workstation test. So you can see which is better at what. So yeah, let's do that.
So this first system here is an HP Pavilion that is an acid green. It is nothing new for you guys, but this system was actually the most expensive. Technically though, you're really gonna be spending the most in the workstation PC, which we'll get to that in a little bit, but this system was a little over $700. It comes with an i3 10100 4-core 8-thread. It comes with a GTX 1654 gig, 8 gigs of RAM, and a 256 gig NVMe SSD. So overall, a pretty balanced system. It's not really any components that are really bottlenecking each other. This one will work great for 1080p gaming on esports titles and maybe even some AAA titles at lower settings.
Now for the home theater PC, we have a Minis Forum PC featuring a Ryzen 7 3750H. It also includes 16 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD. So the main reason these mini PCs exist is for their compact size. And we're calling it a home theater PC because these are pretty popular in people's home theater setups. You can use it for just browsing the web or whatever home theater things you want to use, which we'll talk more about when we dive into the testing. But we love mini PCs, do a lot of reviews of them, and all the outputs and everything are just ready to go. It's super plug and play, and you'll see later on the benchmarks exactly why we really like these things.
I don't have all these specs memorized, so I may be looking at my phone a little bit, but this is an HP Z620 workstation PC / server if you really want it to be, but it has dual processors in it. 2 Xeon E5 2670s that are 2.6 gigahertz, and there's 16 cores, okay? 16 cores and 32 threads total. So basically, you got dual processors, 2 8-core, 16 threads, you combine those and you get 1632. It does actually have an NVIDIA Quadro card in it that is a Quadro 600, which I honestly know nothing about. I just know Quadro cards back in the day were really good for rendering and editing and stuff like that. So obviously this one is older and probably won't be that great, but here's also the real kicker. This thing has 96 gigs of RAM, which is pretty crazy. It should be DDR3 to my knowledge, but it actually has like RAM coolers in multiple spots. You can see here we have like this massive tower cooler here, and there should be another one somewhere else, but I think it's hidden under there. Tons of room for expandability. I'm sure that this power supply too is like something absolutely ridiculous. I would assume it's like 800 watts plus if I had to guess. But yeah, these systems don't come to mess around. They were very, very expensive back in the day. And that is one thing you'll notice is that if you look up workstations, they're all going to be more expensive than normal gaming and home theater PCs, at least if they're newer. Once they get older though, if they're supposed to be a workstation, they're supposed to be the latest and greatest, so they usually go for pretty cheap. We actually picked this one up for a little over $500, which is pretty cool.
So what we're gonna do, again, is test all these in certain applications. We're gonna test a built-in benchmark game for gaming. We're probably gonna do some YouTube 4K playback to show how well the mini PC can be a home theater PC. And then we'll do like a Blender 3D render to show how all those cores are great for rendering. And we'll see which one's better, and maybe one is surprisingly better than the other. So yeah, let's just do that. All right, guys, now we're gonna go ahead and start testing these PCs. First up, we have the HP Z620 workstation featuring a Quadro 600 graphics card and dual E5 2670 processors and like 96 gigs of RAM. What we're gonna be doing, as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, is testing a game, a 3D rendering / workstation task, which we did decide to choose Blender for that benchmark, and then also something that would be, well, home theater focused, like watching a YouTube video at 4K, which seems kind of obvious, but there are some lower end systems that don't play back 4K very well, especially if you have an older graphics card. So we will be testing that also on this workstation and home theater PC and all the other stuff. But first up, we have Borderlands 3 here with the workstation. And so far, as you can tell, this built-in benchmark, it's gonna be a little bit rough. Only getting 11 FPS on very low settings at 1080p. All the gaming will be done at 1080p, by the way. This is a 4K monitor, but it's downscaled to 1080p. And we're just gonna go ahead and start the benchmark and just see. I have a feeling it's gonna take a long time. So I'm just gonna go ahead and let it load in, give you all some first impressions, and then let the benchmark finish and we'll get a final number. All right, guys, we are loading in right now, and just based on how long this is taking and the actual frame timings right here at over 100 milliseconds, it's not looking too good for this Quadro 600. Quadro cards were mainly designed for workstation tasks. There were some workloads that even we won't be able to test here that Quadros make a lot of sense for, but for the most part, they were just higher end versions of the GeForce cards for specific workloads. They were not meant for gaming. There are some higher end Quadros that can game, but they were never ever intended for gaming. So just showing this as a comparison to the gaming PC will show you that just because you have a really high-end HP workstation that has a ton of RAM, dual CPUs in this Quadro graphics card, doesn't mean it's great for everything, and gaming is one of those. Of course, you could slap in a better graphics card into this workstation and probably get an actual gaming experience, but that's not what this was designed for. And as you can tell how long this is taking the load, this poor Quadro just does not want to start the benchmark. It just really doesn't. There's audio coming out, so I know the benchmark needs to start, but it is taking forever. All right, we're going at a very, very awful 7 FPS. We are recording at 60 FPS on the camera. You can see by how smooth my hand is right here. But yeah, this is gonna take a little bit. It looks like we're only gonna get 7 frames. That Quadro is maxed out at 100%. And that CPU is only working at 8%. So not great. And you know that 92 gigs or whatever amount of memory in this thing, we're only using 9 gigs of it. So not optimal for that. We're gonna let this go ahead and run through, and then we're gonna dive into some Blender tests, which is something I think this will probably have the edge at. All right, guys, so the benchmark is done, and it looks like we averaged a grand total of 6 FPS, which is not great, obviously. So gaming, not gonna work very well on this specific workstation PC. That's a good thing to add here, is this video is mainly focused on workstation versus gaming versus mini PCs, but that does not mean all workstation PCs will be totally trash at gaming. There are some higher end workstations that would be perfectly fine at running these games, but they're not designed for gaming. That's the main point we're trying to get across, is you may see all these very flashy specs, but those specs aren't meant for making a super high-end gaming rig. It's mainly meant for workstation level stuff. So let's switch to a workstation level task and see if this older workstation can actually keep up. All right, guys, so we have the Blender benchmark pulled up, and we are downloading the Classroom benchmark, which should be a multi-threaded rendered test. MSI Afterburner should stay up so you can actually see the usage of the dual CPUs and the amount of RAM. I don't expect this to be a super intensive task. There are tasks that are gonna be way more demanding on this system, but this is an easy benchmark that is very thread heavy, should use a decent amount of RAM, and Blender is a little bit better than using something like Cinebench, because Cinebench is very CPU dependent in terms of speed, not just core count. So that CPU that has, well, it boosts only up to like 3.2 gigahertz wouldn't fare as well compared to a more modern CPU like in our gaming PC and Cinebench in some use cases. So we're gonna be going ahead and running the benchmark. I do believe it will use both CPUs because, well, it is running a dual CPU setup. So we're gonna go ahead and hit start benchmark and let this scene load up. Warming up scene, Classroom, here it goes. Now, if I remember right, this benchmark doesn't actually show the render. It kind of does it in the background, so there's no real like visual representation. I could be wrong here. Let's see if it pops up. Yeah, so it doesn't actually pull in the render, but as you can see, look at that CPU at 100% right now. RAM, we're using only about 5 gigs. So imagine if you're doing this, but you're doing like 4 of these renders. That is something where this system would have an advantage because of all that extra RAM, multiple CPUs and things like that. We are pinging this thing at 100% though with those dual CPUs. So we're going to run this benchmark, get some numbers so you can actually compare this data to another PC that we're going to be testing, and then move on to one more test that is more home theater focused. All right, guys, as you can tell, we finished this benchmark in a grand total of 10 minutes and 47 seconds, which I'll be honest, it's a lot longer than I thought it would take. So we'll just see how this thing compares to the gaming PC and the home theater PC in a little bit. But the last thing we're gonna be testing real quick is some YouTube 4K playback. And we're gonna show you the first caveat and problem with this older workstation PC. The fact that it can't actually run at 4K at 60 Hertz because it is an older graphics card that only has drivers up to, well, 2018, and it only has DisplayPort and DVI. So because of that, having older graphics cards, you get 30 Hertz, which isn't great, but if you're watching like movies or things like that, that are normally shot at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second, I mean, it's perfectly fine to watch at 4K still, but it is a downside compared to the mini PC, which I know for sure should have 4K playback, no problems whatsoever. So we're gonna go ahead and go to a Toasty Bros video real quick. And we're gonna watch this absolutely epic video once we get this ad. We're gonna go full screen here and just see if we have any like lagging, any drop off in quality, and then just kind of go from there. All right, so we are running right now at 4K, playing back this awesome video that we shot on our GH5 and is uploaded to YouTube. There is compression on YouTube, obviously, but we are getting a smooth playback even though it is at 30 Hertz. So anything shot at 30 FPS will play back fine at 4K on a 4K monitor and look pretty good while doing so. And I expect all these PCs to be perfectly fine for that. But when we talk about the mini PC here in a second, you'll see why it is a better option for home theater PC compared to, well, this big old chungus right here. So yeah, let's go ahead and switch to another computer and start testing it. All right, guys, we are now in good old Borderlands 3 with the HP gaming PC. And we're gonna open up the visuals here. Now, for the other PC, we did run on like very low settings. So just to keep things like apples to apples so you can actually see a good comparison, we will run this on very low settings again, and you'll see that I'd imagine you'll get way more than a 7 FPS average on this PC. So we'll go to very low here and go ahead and start that benchmark and see what we can get. Again, it's a gaming PC. It's designed for gaming, so this is gonna be the advantage this PC has over the other ones. And yeah, we're just gonna see what the results are. All right, gamers, here we go. And we're looking at like 90 FPS, which is what a gaming PC actually can do. You know, it's actually pretty cool to see that. So we're gonna let this run through the full benchmark and see what we end up averaging. Borderlands 3 is a pretty demanding game, so this built-in benchmark is kind of close to worst case scenario, but running on very low settings at 1080p, I think we'll have pretty decent results. So we're just gonna let this go ahead and finish, get a final number, and then dive into the other tests. All right, guys, so it looks like we ended up with an average of 72 FPS, which is definitely a major increase over that workstation PC. Let's go ahead and dive into the Blender benchmark. All right, guys, we now have the Blender benchmark pulled up on this, well, HP Pavilion gaming PC. We're gonna start the benchmark real quick and see if this can beat the workstation PC. Because again, we bought a workstation PC, but it is an older workstation PC and it is around the exact same price as this newer gaming rig. So, all right, guys, so it ended up being 19 minutes and 2 seconds. Definitely not faster than the workstation. So a newer 4-core 8 thread is still not gonna be as good as those 16 cores and 32 threads. The difference isn't major, but there is definitely a difference still. Let's go ahead and show the last test, which would be the YouTube 4K playback, which will have no problems here. All right, guys, we are running the same 4K video playback here on the gaming PC. One benefit this does have over the workstation PC already is it does support 4K 60 over DisplayPort because it's just modern. So you'll actually be able to get 60 FPS for a lot of gameplay footage and things like that. And just running at 60 Hertz is, well, a standard. You should not be running at 30 Hertz at 4K. That workstation PC, you'd be probably running on a 1080p or 1440p monitor, not something like we're seeing here. So yeah, 4K playback works great. Let's move on to the mini PC. All right, guys, we now have the mini PC 1080p very low settings, built-in benchmark Borderlands 3, and we're already getting better numbers than the Workstation PC. This Vega 10 graphics with the Ryzen 7 3750H seems to be doing a lot better once the benchmark actually loads here. Before we were getting like 7 FPS and really struggling to even load in to any sort of game. So we're gonna go ahead and run the benchmark here, and look at that, 30 FPS. That's like console-like gameplay experience. Not the prettiest in the world running on very low settings, but it can at least run the game a little bit better. Let's let this benchmark finish, and then we'll go to the Blender test. All right, guys, it looks like at the end of the benchmark one, we averaged a total of 27 FPS. 27 frames, definitely more frames than the Workstation PC. So let's go ahead and switch to a Workstation task and see if this mini PC is better than our gaming desktop or even the Workstation PC. I'd imagine it probably won't be, but we're gonna give it a shot. All right, guys, we now have the Blender benchmark pulled up. We are downloading the classroom benchmark, and then we're gonna dive into some testing. Now, just for a little bit of information here, this processor is a 4-core 8-threaded processor. So the exact same core layout as like an i3-10100, but this is a laptop CPU technically. So it is more optimized for mobile, low temperatures, things like that. So it probably won't boost as high as something like a desktop i3. So I do imagine, just based off just pure guessing here, that this is gonna be the worst performer in this test, but regardless, we're gonna run the benchmark anyways, see what we can get, and then compare it in the last test, which is 4K playback, which is what you would use a home theater PC for, 4K playback from things like Netflix, YouTube, and stuff like that. So once this download is finished, we will dive into some testing. All right, guys, so this mini PC definitely, well, had some struggles. It took a grand total of 26 minutes to run the Blender test, which is definitely by far the worst result we've gotten, which is what we expected. This thing is not meant for multi-threaded tasks like, well, Blender renders. So yeah, overall our testing is pretty much done, minus one more thing. We're gonna be pulling up a YouTube 4K video because, well, this is a mini PC that we're designated a home theater PC, and the main thing you'd use a home theater PC for is watching videos back on like YouTube, Netflix, and things like that. So we're gonna go ahead and just do this live. Go to YouTube, go to a Toasty Bros video, Toasty Bros. Those guys are pretty cool. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. We'll pull up the same video we had before, go to 4K, and just make sure we have a pretty decent playback. All right, we are running 4K 60 right now on this awesome video, which you guys need to go check out if you have not seen it. And looks great. This is a big plus for this mini PC compared to that older Workstation PC. One thing is it's super compact. It can play 4K video back, no problem whatsoever. And it works great for a home theater setup. Yeah, you can get like a Fire Stick or something, but for some people, having Windows 10 and the flexibility that Windows 10 offers for like a home theater server or some other stuff that you may be interested in, it really is a big selling point. So home theater PC, really good at what it does. Yeah, that's the bulk of the testing. Let's just go ahead and wrap this video up real quick, shall we?
All right, guys, so I actually have some notes written down on my handy dandy phone here that I'm just gonna read off real quick that I kind of pre-scripted. So just a little breakdown of each of these PCs now that you've gotten to see some benchmarks. The home theater PC, which is this little guy right here, is going to be the least demanding in terms of what you're putting onto it. So typically home theater PCs are going to be running 1080p, 1440, or sometimes 4K videos essentially. So YouTube, Netflix, you name it. Just any type of streaming software, these are great for that. And this one is no exception because it has Wi-Fi built in, it has 2 LAN ports, it even has extra display out. So really, based on the benchmarks we did as well, this one's a little bit of an overkill home theater PC because I wanted to keep all these around the same price, but typically you're gonna spend around $0 to $600 because a lot of people I know get these home theater PCs for free just by building them with old parts because they could be as simple as like a Core 2 Duo if you really wanted to. And one note is that a GPU is not necessary on these. These are totally fine with just an APU or even just Intel integrated graphics. Now gaming PCs, which we have right here, is going to be in the middle of the home theater in the workstation/server PC. So we usually recommend spending a little bit more, sometimes a lot more on the graphics card than the processor, which is going to be kind of the opposite with the workstation PC typically. The GPU isn't necessary for most modern games because you could use something like the 5700G or the 5600G, but obviously if you want a capable gaming PC, we do recommend spending at least $100 on a GPU, and we also recommend at least 4 cores and 4 threads to be able to play most modern games like AAA titles and esports titles. Expect to spend anywhere from $250 to $3,500 on a gaming PC. Now, workstation PCs are going to be the most expensive, and don't confuse a workstation PC with the typical office PC, which often has a consumer grade CPU and other basic home theater / gaming PC components, which really this could honestly be an office PC right here. That's not much different. But workstation PCs are designed for things like heavy CAD and rendering and software farming and stuff like that. So they often feature Xeon CPUs, which you're only going to really see in servers and workstations, or Threadripper CPUs. They often have at least 8 cores and 16 threads. Sometimes they have 2, 3, 4 CPUs. This one has 2. They typically are going to have lower clock frequencies, which obviously with certain programs, you're going to benefit more from something like this i3 than these lower clock but high core count Xeons. And oftentimes you will see workstation PCs have pretty decent graphics cards. A really common brand of graphics cards you'll see is NVIDIA's Quadro series, which they've kind of discontinued in a sense, but the Quadro series were not very good for gaming, but really good for rendering and stuff like that. So if you're doing like an NVENC type render, the Quadro cards were great for that. And the last requirement is typically having a lot of RAM. The minimum you're really going to see on most workstations is going to be 16 gigs. It's often going to be ECC, so that it has less errors, so it's going to cost more. And for the price point on this, we expect to spend $700 to $10,000 in a workstation, but hey, they can go all the way up to $50,000, $60,000, and much more depending on what task they're going to be doing. So hopefully that gives a clear understanding. We have basically least expensive to most expensive. Obviously in this roundup here, we kept them all around the same price just to show you guys the price to performance difference of them. All right guys, so in conclusion, we basically have home theater PC, little guy right here, and as Matt tested, he found that this one was kind of in the middle of almost everything. It did obviously really good at watching 4K, but realistically this one does have a graphics card, so it's going to be like slightly better, but at the end of the day, they can both do 60 hertz, 120 hertz, so at 4K video watching and stuff like that, these are both going to be about the same. Now this one's the one that differs. It can only display out 30 hertz. So if you're watching 4K, you're really only seeing up to 30 FPS. Even though you could technically play back 60, you're not gonna see that nice fluid playback.
And of course, you could upgrade the graphics card in this thing and fix that problem relatively quickly. Just a modern graphics card would make that work. But in recap, the mini PC is, well, a good home theater PC because it's tiny. It doesn't mean this couldn't be a home theater PC or this couldn't be, but it's great because it's tiny. This is a gaming PC because obviously graphics card doesn't mean this couldn't game with a graphics card upgrade, but out of the box, they are what they are and they're pretty good at doing it. So if you want to pick up any of the PCs from today's videos, link in the description down below will be affiliate links and they will help us out. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this kind of experimental content. Let us know if you have a home theater PC, gaming PC, or workstation PC down below and what you all think of the differences.
So as always, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, check out our other 2 YouTube channels and also our twitch.tv/toastybros, and do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
And we'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.
And hey, each one of these PCs in this video will be for sale at PCBros.tech.
If this is just too intimidating for you and you really just don't want to deal with building your own PC or shopping around for your own PC, our friendly people at PC Bros, including us, will be happy to help you out. Buy a PC from us, PCBros.tech, link down below. See you guys later. Goodbye.
Peace out.